Welcome, everyone, to the online book launch for Accretion by Irfan Ali. My name is Anjogia. You're joining me from my home in Toronto. I am the events coordinator for Bookshop, which is one of Toronto's oldest independent bookstores with a focus on equity, diversity, and social justice. When, when this is all over, come visit us on Roncesvalles. Before we begin the night, I would like to offer a land acknowledgement. The sacred land on which we operate has been a site of human activity for 15,000 years. This land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, and the nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. The territory was a subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Turo Wampum says we are going to live on this land together and respect each other's sovereignty. The Dish with One Spoon is an agreement that recognizes that we live off each other's The Dish with One Spoon is an agreement that recognizes that we live off the same resources. It is hard to eat a collective meal together off a dish with one spoon. Hence, protocols are put in place to ensure mutual respect and accountability to each other and to the land. Ontario is covered by 46 treaties and other agreements. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. Our intersecting communities are comprised of those native to this land, Indigenous people from other territories, as well as settlers who have come here by choice, force, or otherwise a result of colonialism and imperialism. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission 94 Calls to Actions reaffirms that the treaties with Indigenous peoples must be lawfully honored. We are all treaty people and responsible for honoring and upholding these agreements. We are grateful for the opportunity to work on this territory and to share space with all of you. So I'd like to say a big thank you to everyone who helped bring this evening together. Thank you to Brenda at Brick Books, Irfan's publicist. We're really thrilled to have been able to pull this together after the initial book launch had to be canceled. Big thank you to Michael Ranchik from Another Story Bookshop, who's doing all of our tech. Huge thank you to Emily Pohl-Weary, who is joining us for a conversation. And of course, a big warm welcome to Irfan Ali. So the way we're going to have this evening unfold is Irfan will begin with a reading for about 10 to 12 minutes. Then we'll move into a conversation with Emily. And then finally, we'll have a chance for the audience to ask questions. You can ask questions directly on the YouTube chat function. And Emily will, after her conversation, will give those questions verbally to Irfan. We are very excited to announce that Another Story Bookshop will have books available for sale, for delivery, or for shipment. We are not doing curbside pickups, but just this week we decided to resume our deliveries and shipments. And we can get you personally signed copies. If you are interested in having a signed copy, go onto our website. It is www.anotherstory.ca. Type in Accretion. You'll see Irfan's books. You can fill out the web store order. And when you do that, there'll be a note section. And you can just say, please have Irfan sign my book, and make sure you tell us who you would like the book signed to. We'll get them into your hands on Friday. If you live in the West End, we'll deliver them for free. And if not, we will happily put them in the mail for you. If you are not in Toronto, we have amazing independent bookstores all across Canada. Massey Books in Vancouver, Glass Bookshop in Edmonton, Octopus Books in Ottawa, and many other bookshops who would be very happy to get you a copy of Irfan's book. So please, it's really important that we support our authors now. All of our authors who have had their books come out in the spring, at this time are having a hard time. So let's make sure that we buy their books. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Irfan Ali, who is a poet, essayist, writer, and educator. His short poetry collection, Who I Think About When I Think About You, was shortlisted for the 2015 Bronwyn Wallace Award for Emerging Writers. Accretion is his first full-length work. Irfan was born, raised, and still lives in Toronto. We're so thrilled to be presenting the Toronto book launch, the Canadian book launch, the virtual live book launch for Accretion. Irfan, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Am I live right now? I can't actually tell. Just before we get started, I feel like every time I do a reading, I tend to get pretty nervous and forget to say thanks to certain people or thanks to everybody. And I want to make sure I don't do that today. So I left a little post-it note of all the people I got to give thanks to. So first off, thank you to my mentor, my good friend, Emily Pohl-Weary, who will be on screen shortly, who is going to be interviewing me and also is a huge part of the reason why A, I'm a writer, and B, why this book was published to begin with. Who else? Thank you to Anju, Mike, and everyone else at Another Story Bookshop. Thank you to Brick Books, especially Nick, Elena, Brenda, and Kitty, for taking a chance on a very strange book of poetry written by a very strange person. Thank you to the Toronto Arts Councils and the Ontario Arts Councils for the financial support that they provided throughout this process. And thank you to everybody who's watching and saying ridiculous stuff about me in the chat already. So just a little bit about the book before I get started with the reading. So it is a collection of poetry. However, I think a more apt description might be a verse novella because it tells a persistent narrative all throughout. It's told in 5 sections, the first of which is called Origins, which is kind of about the context of the story. And you'll hear when I'm describing some of the poems, I'll use the words the narrator and me kind of interchangeably because it is a very, very autobiographical, or is really autobiographical. There are a few little tweaks to reality to kind of smooth out the narrative, but it is more or less a story of the last major depressive episode I had and kind of the things that I learned coming out of it. So I'm going to try to give you a few slices of the narrative that maintain the overall structure, and so you can still get a sense of how it works. But this may or may not be a catastrophic failure, so I apologize in advance if it is. So I'm going to start with a piece from Origins, which is the first section, which is, again, talking about, I guess, some of the contextual bedrock of who I/the narrator is. And I'm just going to read one piece from this called Song for My Sisters. So just a little bit of context of this piece. I come from a family of all boys. There's 4 of us. At least 2 of us are on the chat right now. I think I saw them. So in a family without any daughters, I think somebody kind of starts to adopt that role a little bit, and that person kind of became me in the family. And that was definitely a huge source of insecurity for me, I think, for most of my life, not feeling fully like a man. But I think it's something that as I've gotten older, I've started to really come into and started to appreciate the ways that kind of pressure changed me, I think, more positively than it did otherwise. I will note, though, I think my partner would also would want me to say that. I do still acknowledge that I'm still a man and still trash, just so that we're clear. But I digress. So this is Song for My Sisters. You were 2, I think, only beings in this world, but women in another, who were to be the coaches through my clumsy games, or the mortar binding tradition to honor. Love is an unbreachable mass, Mama taught me. It's only moved from one place to another. You'd both already taken root. To be part sister in a brother's body is a special kind of cruelty. But in a world already burning with what it means to be a man, maybe that is the only mercy. This is very, very strange to do when there is literally no feedback whatsoever. But I am going to keep going, and actually maybe I'll check. Oh, there are people here. Okay. I'll keep going. So another piece from the Origins section. This one is called Paki. So in terms of this piece just quickly about it. Obviously, race is a major factor in my identity and in the kind of formulation of the narrative of the story. But it's something that I think oftentimes we simplify the narrative of race as something that's external, where I think the true damage of it is that it's kind of stamped onto you and you carry it within yourself as well. And I was trying to write a piece that could capture that aspect of it, or that complexity of it. So Paki means pure. So it's strange how any white boy could pry it from my hands and wield it against me. Maybe the scars can explain it, left as they cracked and cracked our nations open to slake their thirsts. Or it's that promise that even now hangs at the end of every sentence. The purity is meant first as an armor. A people lifted us up on the crest of their dreams, sent us to sanctuary, and in return asked only to be remembered. Maybe the word cuts because it's an empty promise, like a man who still proclaims the Shahada, though he's long ago abandoned the faith. Why didn't they choose another to ward over their memory? Couldn't my forebears tell I was a coward? Did I forget all of their faces? Did I be so wounded by a single word? So I'm going to go on to the next section. So the next section is the first of the 3 sections that tell the actual narrative of the story. So the first is called Reflection. And Reflection is like the collection is ostensibly a collection of love poetry. And the 3 narrative sections kind of tell, I guess, the progression of the main character, the narrator's love. And the first section is about them finding it, finding that new love, and also finding themselves reflected in another. So the first piece I'm going to read, a really short one, is called Water. Like Narcissus, you could let yourself waste away on the bank. Some questions are more important than survival. What is it there dancing beyond the surface? Reflection or refraction? This or the fantasy? I'm gonna keep going. This is so strange. I'm sorry. I know I keep saying this, and I'm sorry I'm gonna say it a couple more times. It's like I'm literally talking to myself. So this piece is one of the older pieces in the collection. There are a couple of pieces from the collection that were also part of who I think about when I think about you, which is the short collection that was shortlisted for the Bronwyn Wallace Award in 2015. And this one I think has always been my favorite. It's called Big. It's about elephants, which those who know me will know that it's my favorite animal by far. I'm gonna put a bunch of elephants in the chat box if I can find them. And I think what I really liked about this poem in particular when it came to the collection was, once the collection was done, this one fits so naturally. And I think a lot of the thematic kind of concerns of the collection are really, really reflected within this piece itself. And I just think it's, one of my favorites. So it's called Big, as I said. I like elephants, or I should say I love elephants. I like that they chew their food slowly the way my little brother does. I like the way they lumber, not lope, the simplicity of their thick bodies, how each foot has the girth of a tree, how their ears seem almost razor sharp at the edges. I like that their bodies can produce a substance like ivory. I like that they take revenge against poachers and murderers. I like the steel spring strength hidden under the folds of skin. I regret being born in this thin, useless body. I regret these toothpick legs. I regret this big nose, which is somehow not big enough. I regret this disproportionate brain that has outgrown its empathy. I regret not being born an elephant, or I could have wrapped my trunk tightly around you and taken you away from this violence and hate. I could have moved one thick leg after the other through the garbage and the broken bone. But you are here with your arms wrapped around me. You are here with your back absorbing the blows. You are here dying to take revenge. Maybe you are an elephant, and that is why I love you. Okay. Moving on. Very strange. Very strange. So I'll just one last piece from the reflection section, which I guess sets up the next part of the narrative. This is called the flaw. So if you know anything about Persian carpets, it's well known that they're often sewn with one intentional flaw in them. The reason being that the belief is that only God can be perfect. So anything that a human makes has to be given a flaw. So this poem is, I guess, about that. That wasn't a very smooth transition, but whoops. The flaw. Islamic tapestries are purposefully woven with flaws, errant threads, failures of symmetry, concessions to God and his singular perfection, and acquiescence to the fallibility of even the best. It should take more than a flaw to undermine a levee, but I lack even a carpet's constitution. One flaw and I come unraveled. One flaw and it all comes rushing out. How am I in terms of time? I did not even check yet. There we go. We got elephants. Okay, I'm good on time. I don't know. I'll just keep going, and then when I get too long, then somebody just tell me to shut up. Okay, so the next section of the narrative is called possession. This is where our narrator / me / our narrator essentially finds that his flaw has undermined and destroyed his relationship, and kind of gives into an obsession. So the first piece I'm going to read is called Majnun, and if you know or if you've read the synopsis, you've probably heard that the book is or the collection is heavily inspired by the story of Layla and Majnun, which is like almost like an analog to Romeo and Juliet, like a tragic love tale from quite a long time ago, from the 11th century, I want to say. I should know this off the top of my head, but I'm nervous and I am forgetting details. So each of the three narrative sections starts with a poem named after one of the three main characters of that romance. So Layla, Majnun, and Ibn Salam, who is the kind of third person that takes Layla away from Majnun. And Majnun itself, the word Majnun means possessed. It means to be obsessed with something. And it's not the character's actual name. It's what he's dubbed after his obsession with Layla kind of drives him mad. So as I mentioned, each of the three narrative sections starts with a poem, and they're all stylistically similar. So the one I'm going to read is Majnun, which is the start of the possession section. And they're also all they kind of take us out of the kind of human drama and into the celestial drama. And part of the reason why I wanted to do that was that, to create that kind of tension between what it feels like to be in love as this like grand thing that no one else can experience, this celestial thing, and then what it is to everyone else, where everyone's like, just get over yourself, dude. It's not that big a deal. And I wanted to keep that in there. So this is Majnun. This is a story of two stars in the inevitable decay of their orbit. The slow dawn of reality, inertia sapped in thus collision, shearing matter from both bodies, setting each back on a lonesome trajectory. Only his need to salve the burning brand she left outstrips self-preservation. He peels himself from familiar orbits, hurtles after her into an unknown. This is the willing dereliction of safety, the wild chase towards absolution. But pursuit is so often a precursor to violence. So I'm just going to read one more piece from this section. This one's called apophenia, which is apophenia is the kind of psychological fallacy, or the psychological cognitive fallacy that occurs when people see images that aren't there in something else. The famous examples are people seeing, Jesus Christ at like the bottom of like a peanut butter jar or whatever. And I think that used to be in an earlier draft of this poem. It no longer is. But a big part of this book and a big part of the experience that inspired this book was, I think, a return to faith. And I mean that in a very literal way, that this experience that was experienced, or that was romantic in nature, ultimately is what kind of gave me a new understanding of my relationship with the divine. And that is a major thread that I tried to sew through the collection itself. Maybe with some success, maybe not. I don't know. But I'm just going to read this. Epiphania. You appeared to a chorus of old men's cracking knees and backs as we straightened up out of sajda at Friday prayer. Your face unmistakable in the mosaic patterns on the walls of the masjid. Day by day, I stayed there gazing, longing once again for the sharp lines of your eyes and mouth. The imam grinned proudly, mistaking my obsession for piety. Fasted, or maybe just forgot to eat, until, like you, I became a shadow of lines and angles. I began to inch my way towards you on memory's dusty beams. And I'm just going to skip ahead to the final section, the climactic section of the narrative, which is called Revulsion. So this section is where our narrator kind of realizes that his love is lost and she's not coming back, and he kind of gives in to his worst impulses. So I'm going to read one piece called Gravity. So Gravity is one of the few poems in the narrative, other than the Majnun, Layla, and Ibn Salam pieces, that maintains that celestial motif. And I just did that because I thought it was the most apt metaphor for that sense of being desired or not being desired, and how it feels like, you lack gravity, that you can't actually pull people into your orbit and everyone else can. And I think, after I wrote this, and I think at one point it was up on a site somewhere, and I looked at it and I was like, oh, like if you see that piece out of context, it really just looks like something an incel would write. Really like an angry man who feels like undone. And it was strange to write it and then see that and then be like, oh, I was in that place where I was skirting with that same kind of thought. And thankfully the experience that occurred allowed me to kind of self-correct that. But I think it was kind of interesting because it showed, I think, how easy it is for men in particular, I think, because I think it is a very male problem to fall into these patterns of thinking. So this is called Gravity. An insignificant thing lacks the needed weight to attract. Lost state, it will barely inspire a reaction. An insignificant thing will always try to accrete, even if hate is the only available mass. Let it build until you collapse alone beneath your own weight. Then for a moment, you will become a fire on the horizon, beautiful and impossible to ignore. And I'm just going to read one more piece from this section, Staring at the Sun. This is kind of the penultimate piece right before the climax happens. The pupil can only contract so much before it shuts forever. The phantom will remain long after you blink. They tell you not to stare because all foolish stares eventually beget tragedy, because pride has always been deadlier than poison. What they don't tell you is that the deepest crevices were never meant to be illuminated. They don't tell you that one day we will all beg mercy from the burning blade of memory. The eyes themselves will become supplicants. They will strain for any release. I was going to read a few from the ending section, but I think I ran out of time. And then if you want to read it, and go buy the book, I guess. I don't know. And that's for me. Thank you very much, folks. I think I'm not leaving. I'm still here, but Emily's going to come, and then we're going to talk. And I'm going to try not to be even more awkward than I've already been.
Thank you, Irfan. That was wonderful. And yes, I encourage everyone to pick up a copy. Again, Another Story Bookshop will be doing deliveries over the next several weeks. You can pick one up from your local bookshop. They'll be doing deliveries. And we are happy to put one in the mail. That was really beautiful, Irfan. Thank you so much. I can't wait to read the rest of it. I would now like to bring up Emily Pohl-Weary, who has published 7 books, including poetry collection Ghost Sick, young adult novel Not Your Ordinary Wolf Girl, Hugo Award-winning biography Better to Have Loved, a female superhero anthology, a poetry collection, and a girl pirate comic. Emily has a PhD in adult education and community development from the University of Toronto. She is an assistant professor in the University of British Columbia's Creative Writing Program. Emily, welcome to Irfan's book launch.
Hi, thank you, Angela. And I'm just so pleased to be here, Irfan, celebrating your brand new collection of poetry. Hearing you read was so moving. Especially, I was teaching, and now, of course, we can't travel. So it's really...
Oh, Em, apparently the sound's down.
Oh, pardon me?
Is the sound down?
Everyone's saying it, and I can't hear it.
Oh, yeah? Oh.
What? Is the sound down?
Are you muted? No, you're not muted.
There.
Oh, now we're good. Okay.
Was I talking all the time with... Were people hearing me?
I think now they can.
Oh, hi. Okay, now you can hear me. Well, I don't know what was going on. Something was happening. And so I will just start all over again. Okay, so I am Emily Pohl-Weary, and it's so Oh, I don't know when I said, okay. I'm going to stop reading what's in the chat. I'll just go over it all again. It's just such a pleasure to be here, Irfan. Hearing you read, oh, there's the word moving. Hearing you read from the book was so moving, even though I've heard a good number of those poems before in different states, different versions. And I want to thank Angela and Michael from Another Story, one of my favorite Toronto bookstores. I really highly encourage all of you to order a signed copy if you're in Toronto from Another Story. And if you're here in Vancouver, where I live, get a copy from Massey Books or one of the other independent bookstores who are so wonderful and are delivering or allowing you to come pick up books despite this pandemic that's kept us all apart. So yes, I live in Vancouver where the birds are still singing. It's 5:30 here and cherry blossoms at full bloom. But maybe one good thing to come out of this pandemic is that I get to be part of Irfan's book launch. And it's all too easy because we've been friends for a long time to devolve into being ridiculous. And I'm going to try to stay serious because I really, honestly, seeing this book come into the world means the world to me.
I will also take it seriously.
Okay. I met Irfan almost 10 years ago now. I can't believe it's been that long. We met over dim sum in Toronto, and he talked about writing all the time. I think he pulled out a diary and showed me some of his early writing. And shortly thereafter, he joined the Parkdale Street Writers, which is a writing group for youth that I ran out of the Parkdale Library's windowless basement for several years. It was such a wonderful group of people, and I can even see some of you. Hi, on YouTube Live. So it's just wonderful to see you show up in all these different ways, all doing these wonderful things. And so after Irfan was part of the Parkdale Street Writers, he and I went on to work together for a few years doing arts education programming for young people in the Academy of the Impossible, and which was an experimental learning center of sorts, also in downtown Toronto, not far from the Parkdale Library, and we've remained friends ever since. I feel a bit like a much shorter, paler big sister. And his sense of humor, fearlessness, honesty, and humility all inspire me. It bring me back to writing. They keep me grounded. It's so wonderful to be part of this celebration, as I said. So it was back in those.
I'm gonna cry.
Oh, it was back in those early years when he wrote drafts of some of my favorite poems in this book: Sleeping with the Sun, Aftertaste, Concord and Bloor, Big. They all show a Toronto that makes me remember what I love about the city, with all of its beauty and its ugliness, and I can practically smell Toronto here in the beautiful, mild and balmy Vancouver when I read this book. But even when he started writing, it was evident to me and many others that he had a great talent for exposing the heart of a moment, of a feeling, of a fleeting exchange. He could capture it and sort of shine it back to the reader in a way that made them think differently about the moment, or think a little more deeply about it. So when he was a finalist for the Bronwyn Wallace Award in 2015, I was so happy for him. And then over the years, since then, before then, I watched him do numerous iterations of this collection and kind of nudged him along the way a few times. It's transformed into a really interesting, complex book, and it is honestly just such a joy to hold Accretion in my hands. One of the most exciting things for me about Irfan's writing is that it's really coming from left field. Even though I was around over the years, when I reread it, it kept surprising me. These poems didn't emerge from creative writing workshops. Not that my students aren't also wonderful. I have some great students, but they didn't come from creative writing workshops or any of the familiar schools of Canlit poetry. They're inspired by struggle, by experiences of racism, by hip hop, by faith, by inequality, and they form a kind of roadmap for survival and an elegy to life. They bring out in the reader a real desire to understand and to flourish. So, with that. Please put questions in the chat there. Although I believe there's a bit of a lag of a few minutes. So if you post your question and I don't ask it, I'm going to ask some questions first, but I'm asking you to think of some and put them in the chat on YouTube. So Irfan, are you ready?
Yes. I'm ready to make a damn fool of myself. Yes, that's correct.
You will not. You spoke a little about the narrative skeleton of Accretion. I know it's inspired by Kendrick Lamar's album, like the structural bones of it, by his album Good Kid, Mad City. Can you talk a little bit more about the structure and why that particular album inspired you so much?
Sure. Thank you. That's a wonderful question. I'm already not taking it seriously. Sorry. Okay, I will now get serious. So, as I mentioned, Accretion is very, very, very heavily inspired by like a major depressive episode in early 2015. It was kind of I think the closest I ever got, unfortunately, to that final precipice. But it's also where, I guess, at that place where I found kind of these really transformative truths that helped me, I think, become the person I'd really wanted to be, for lack of a better way of saying it. And in the lead up to those days when that transformation kind of happened, there was a lot of different things I was like doing. And, you know, when it happened, it was like, you know, like literally like a bolt from the blue, like something just so powerful and so transformative that I was like, I need to write down everything that I was doing during that period of time that could have helped bring this along. And one of the things I was doing at the time was like listening to that Kendrick Lamar album on repeat. And if you've heard it before, you might know, but I think a lot of people who have listened to it, I mean, this is going to sound like stupid to me, but I'm just going to say it. Like, I don't think probably most people would have listened to it quite as intensely or as intently as I did, because I was listening. It was literally on repeat for a solid month for me. And it's a concept album. So it also tells a persistent narrative through music. And that narrative is, I think, something similar. The context is obviously different. It's you know, Compton, LA, instead of Toronto, Canada. But I think like the essence of the story is the same. You know, a young man who is trying to find ways to learn how to love himself, but is never quite given the tools until it kind of gets to this last point where it's like a quite literally do or die situation where you have to figure out, is this the time where I'm actually going to like confront, I guess, my own demons and my own failures of love. So I think if you pick up Accretion and then you do take like a deep dive of Good Kid, Mad City, and listen to it all the way through, I think you can see those, like the kind of narrative beats, I think, are quite similar. I don't know if I answered the question. I just started rambling for a while. This is really weird when you're like on the internet away from me.
I know it is weird, but you did answer the question. It's really interesting to me. It sort of leads into my next question, actually. In your Quill Fire review, Bardia Sine, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, wrote faith and cynicism, love and betrayal, self-loathing and forgiveness. These themes are unified by an earnest devotion to the pursuit of clarity despite life's contradictions. You seem very comfortable with contradictions and exploring these. Can you talk a little about the way you handle mental health issues and what you called earlier your return to faith?
Can you rephrase the question? I'm not quite sure what
it's a big one. Can you talk a little bit about the way you handle mental health issues and what you called your return to faith?
Sorry, I started laughing. This is very serious.
The way you handle mental health issues in this collection, not in life in general.
Now I'm kind of wishing that I asked you to give me the questions in advance so I could prepare for them, because I feel like I'm not going to do a great job on this one. I mean, I think what is at the essence of faith, and I think at the essence of like a healthy understanding of mental health, is a kind of sense of duality, or a sense of, I guess, like the pluralism of truth, that understanding that, you know, we are, for example, within Islamic tradition, the belief is that everything that we do is written for us, for example, so that, you know, we're, in a way, we don't have agency over our own lives. And that creates this kind of contradiction where, well, if we don't have agency over our own lives, then there shouldn't be a reason why hell or heaven exists, or there should be no suffering, because if God's supposed to love us all equally, then that shouldn't make sense. And I think if you live life, or if you see truth through, I think, kind of like a singular lens where there's only one thing is true or the other thing is true, there is no way to resolve that contradiction. But I think what I was trying to get through this collection, and also just, I think, what I'm trying to practice even in my own life, and what was a major learning that came out of the experience that inspired this book, was that understanding that actually contradiction has to exist, that humans are by nature contradictory beings, and to move with love and to move with grace in the world actually requires us to hold, these very divergent and often contradictory and diametrically opposed truths simultaneously together. So yeah, that may or may not answer the question. I hope.
That was great. Let's talk about Toronto and the Toronto that is represented in these poems. So the city has a bit of a bad reputation for being unlovely and utilitarian. And I have to admit, I can see that. And I can also see that there's so much more to the city. And one of the things about your poetry is that I see my Toronto in there. I see the Toronto of a person, a person who grew up there, a person who still loves that city. And I wanted to talk to you about how you think growing up there and your Toronto communities have shaped your writing.
I mean, I think I have to answer that question kind of two different ways. Like, I think the Toronto of like now is a very different place from the place I grew up in, unfortunately, and not in the best ways. Like, I think, like the catastrophic effects of gentrification have really eviscerated and gutted the city. But the city I grew up in, the city that, we grew up in, I think was like a really special place. Like, I remember when I was younger, we would, like, my brothers and my friends and I we'd have this conversation of like, there's something like, I haven't traveled around the world, but I know that there's something special about this city, that something happens here that doesn't happen anywhere else. And I think that thing, that special, that kind of spark that existed here, I think is part of the reason why there is so much beautiful art that does come out of this place. I remember in like 2012 or 2013, there was a documentary called Brooklyn Boheme, which is about, I'm like forgetting the name right now and I feel really stupid. But it's about, I guess, Brooklyn in the 1980s and how there was this huge group of artists, writers, filmmakers, musicians who were all kind of just like bouncing ideas off of each other. It was, oh, you guys are sending messages and you're just, oh, never mind. That's nothing to do with me yet. Okay. So there's like, I guess, kind of like a synergistic way for, sorry, I hate that word because it's like very business school, but I think it's the easiest word I can think of for it. But that's like, people would just kind of bounce energy off of each other that built up. And, these were people like Saul Williams, people like Spike Lee, people like Rosie Perez. Like, these are all people that came out of that like incubation chamber together in that place. And I think that existed here in the city. Maybe it still does, but I think for me, there's so much of a sense of loss in the city now that it feels like it's kind of gone. And it's definitely like a sad thing. Like, I think, a lot of the stuff in this collection is like, my brain just completely blanked, is the loss of love in kind of a human sense. But I think those same kinds of feelings of grief and mourning that we have over people, like we experience in cities as well. And it's definitely something that I feel of Toronto, unfortunately. Hopefully that might change. Who knows?
No,
Who knows what the future after the pandemic looks like?
I think in some of my favorite Toronto books, the city itself is a character, just like any of the other characters in there. I mean, in part, what makes reading so fascinating is you get to look through other people's windows, the windows they have on the world.
Oh, but there's another thing I wanted to add, or should I not? I don't know. I thought the second thing was just like, I think Toronto, like in the collection, in the context kind of section, origins, there is a poem specifically about the city, and I think that was important because I think it's like, I mean, I kind of I don't know if this is the right term, but I called it like a limbo of lost lovers, that we're always in a way where everybody here is stuck. Like a thing I've noticed all my life is that people here really yearn for connection, but they're also so wedded to the sense of being aloof, of being kind of trying to be cool, trying to be something more than they are, that it creates this like barrier where we're seeking connection, but we're also kind of like pushing it away simultaneously at the same time. And I think that was that experience, which I think is just so profoundly human, for lack of a better way of saying it. It was reflected in that narrative, and I think also really inspired what happened to me and what happens, I think, to people in general. Maybe.
Okay, I'll just ask you a couple more questions and we'll throw it to the audience because they're starting to ask some great things. So I know your brother Rizwan is in the audience tonight, the online audience. I wanted you to talk a little bit about that amazing cover, because I look at it and it makes me feel mad. And I know that's one of the themes in the book. But are there any elements of it that you want to talk about? Because I find it like attracts and repulses in equal measure, in a good way, I guess.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, actually, I'd love to talk about the cover because it's probably the thing I can talk about most coherently. Actually, this is the one good thing that I think is great about this format is that like people can literally open up new tabs while I'm talking and like check stuff. So like when I was writing the collection, I knew that like that celestial, that kind of astronomical imagery, I knew I wanted that to be central to the theme, but also obviously be reflected within the cover. And initially when we were in the design stages and like the editing stage of the book, there's a great press in Toronto chapbook press called Desert Pets, run by Catriona Wright and Emma Dolan. And I think Emma was potentially floated as a person who would potentially design the cover. And at the time I'd seen there was this Vice magazine has a movies division now, I guess. And they had put out this sci-fi film called Aniara. And I like remember seeing the poster and being like, wow, that's like, A, it's beautiful, but B, I think it really captures kind of what I wanted in terms of gravity, in terms of sense of gravitational fields, that was central to what I wanted to see on the cover. And if you open up a new tab and you search Aniara, Aniara, I think that's Aniara movie or whatever, you can see the poster. And then when I saw Emma's work, like it was perfect for that. It was like this this serendipitous like God loves me gift, and I was like so excited about it. And then unfortunately, I'm very fortunate for her because she deserves this recognition. I think she was picked up by Penguin as their designer, so she was like, I can't take anything on. So it was definitely like a little bit deflating. But then my younger brother Rizwan, who's in the chat somewhere, I think there he is. We worked with him. Actually, Emily and I both worked with him. He did our poster designs for Impossible Words, which was the reading series that we did out of the Academy of the Impossible back in like 2012 and 13. And I had this great experience with him where, he's a person that knows me, that we can like really like in that kind of like designer client relationship that I think is often horrible. And maybe it was horrible for him. I'm just pretending like it was great. He could have hated it. I don't know. You can ask him in the chat. We could kind of, I think, float ideas back and forth a lot easier. So we started working. I showed him a couple of images, the Aniara thing, as well as like a couple of like slides of or a couple of images or screenshots of different gravitational field modeling software, being like, can we do this on like on a cover? And we worked on it for a little bit, and we couldn't really, it was difficult to find how to make it work. To have like the three kind of celestial bodies, the Layla, the Majnun, the Ibn Salam, and have like the Layla and the Majnun kind of repulsing each other, have the Ibn Salam and the Layla kind of attracting each other, and like how to make that actually work was just becoming way too difficult. So we just, tried to simplify it and see if there was a way that we could do it that would look really simple. And then we just, I started to just sketch out a couple of things with just really straight angular lines. And then what we came out with was, at the end, was that. So, I mean, I'm super, super grateful to my brother, because I think this cover is amazing. But also, if you know what it actually means, it's not just three random dots. It's the three characters, the first two, the top two rejecting each other, and then the bottom two repulsing each other. And then the suggestion that this continues for everyone elsewhere. Pretty smart. Sorry, that was really
I think I've wondered before if there's anything you four Ali brothers can't do. I mean, Rizwan, this is really a stunning cover. And I think your other brothers are there in the audience. So, okay. I think this should be the last question, or the second last question. But you worked in community development as an arts educator, as a high school teacher. These are really engaged, all-encompassing jobs. And I wonder, I know for me, that my day job, I'm a professor, my day job does bleed into my artistic practice at times. Does that happen for you?
Like in terms of the writing, maybe not so much yet. Like I feel like it will naturally, just because, I am a high school teacher. I probably spend my time like the humans that I'm observing and probably like formulating characters from in my work are like going to be high school students, because that's who I'm around so much. But obviously not yet. But I think it's been actually like one of the most heartwarming things is, like my students are probably more excited about the book than I am in a way. I remember early on in the process, there was a kid who was doing his writer's craft, his grade 12 writer's craft summative, and he basically submitted a parody of my manuscript. And no, it's great. I mean, I feel like having all these different lives is almost, in a way, it's more challenging to be a writer. Like, or maybe that's not quite correct. Like, it's beneficial insofar as you're getting a great deal of just material that like writing is a reflection of a life lived. And I think having this like breadth of experiences means a richer life to have lived. And I'm very grateful for that. But I mean, the other flip side of the coin is that unfortunately it takes writing takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of solitude. It takes a lot of energy, and having to maintain all these different lives can be detrimental, and it's like can sometimes be challenging. But at the end of the day, I'm also like especially with poetry, I find that you can't force it. It comes when it comes, and it comes from life, and it just it comes as it will. And you can regulate it, and you can ritualize your writing in different ways. But at the end of the day, I think what's more important is to live the life, and then let the poetry come afterwards. I don't know if that answered the question.
That answered the question. So my very last question: what video games are you playing right now? I want to know. Just
right
now?
Like since pandemic started, or
inquiry minds. Sure. What's getting you through the day?
I have not played any video games since pandemic.
Are you serious?
Seriously, I downloaded a Super Nintendo emulator, and then I didn't actually play anything. I've been watching other people on YouTube play Final Fantasy VII, the remake of it.
Oh, that's even worse.
Yeah, I know. Well, the problem is the computer that I usually play Civilization on is at my parents' house, and I can't go visit them anymore. So I can't play it.
You need to invest in an Xbox like I did. Okay. So here's a question from the audience. It's actually from author Farzana Doctor. As you were creating this, hi Farzana. As you were creating this collection, were there any poems or themes that you decided to leave out, and why?
Consciously, probably not. Like, I think I knew that this collection had to be really, like, it had to be raw. Like, I don't think it would have made sense. Like, the experience that inspired the collection was me, I think, coming to terms with everything about myself, including the worst parts about myself. So it almost didn't make sense to hide anything. But that being said, I'm sure there's ways that I've subconsciously like pulled my punches to make myself look not as bad. Uh, I don't know, human nature. Like there are pieces in there that I think, my brother and other people who've read it can certainly attest that there was a couple of pieces in there that I was like waffling on for a long time and thinking about cutting, and then like was
Which
like, no,
one?
I'm not going to mention nothing because people
I
make
want to
up.
know.
Yeah, well, you talk to me later.
Okay,
I
fine.
think this piece is about family that I think, writing
Yeah,
about family is always difficult. Like it's always a difficult thing. Every writer who I've seen who's commented on that has talked about, there is this push and pull with writing about family, about, wanting to be honest, but also not wanting to,
hurt someone.
yeah, hurt people. And I think also knowing that, you are, as a writer, like a writer is not a special person. Like you are only still seeing stuff from your own perspective. Like that other person that you're writing about is has their own perspective, and they don't get the same platform that you do. So you have to be, I think, a little bit mindful about the fact that that fairness to them is important as well.
Definitely. Okay. This is from I'm gonna mess up the names people have put on there, but Hedju Pengu. Hedju Pengu. Which one of your poems is your version of swimming pools?
Wait, who's the person who's asked that?
The name they've used is Hedju Pengu. I don't know.
All right.
Don't know who everyone is.
What's my version of swimming pools? That's actually a good question, given that I just said that it is the thing. Actually, do you know what? Now I feel like I can actually probably also semi-answer the last question. I don't think there is a swimming pool because I think I did probably pull my punches and not talk about kind of substance-related stuff in the collection where I probably actually could have. But there are certain things that I wasn't sure, or maybe I was a little bit more hesitant to really talk about, and that probably was one of them. And I still am going to be talking about it in very, very vague terms here, just so that I don't incriminate myself in any way.
I think we're sharing screens here. It's getting a little confusing behind the scenes, but I see a bunch of other questions. So I'm going to go to Aga Piasha. They're screen names, so we don't know the real names, but they're all interesting questions, so I'll ask them. I have a question about sound. You draw on both hip hop and Islamic poetry, but your work doesn't necessarily sound like either. What do you think or want your poetry to sound like?
Oh, that's a really good question. It's funny to me. I think when I read like that back copy, I think like if you pick it up and you're expecting it to really sound like hip hop, you'd be like sorely disappointed. But I think it's more about, I guess, like, I think some of the versions of Synopsis have, to the soundtrack of it, because it comes out of that place. But in terms of what do I want my poetry to sound like, to answer that, I think there's actually something, Emily, that you told me years and years ago. I think when I showed you my like first little sheaf of like really crappy poems that I had never showed to anyone else before, and was like, and I'd like showed them to you. I think the most powerful feedback you gave me at that time was like, you're trying to sound like what you think a poet is supposed to sound like, and what you should be trying to aspire to in your writing is to sound like yourself, right? Like I think that was really, really transformative for me for my writing, not only in terms of just poetry, but all kinds or all genres, but especially my poetry, that, what I aspire to sound like is like myself, with maybe like a little bit better word choice than I would use, because I certainly am not as eloquent when speaking as I am in my writing, but ultimately I'm trying to sound like me, if that makes any sense.
Okay. Another question from Cindy Watson. Are you already planning the next book?
Yes, but am I going to be able to get it done is another question. There is a novel like I've written 3 chapters of, but also I think with like novel writing, and I think the exercise of writing and editing this book was a huge exercise in humility, and kind of like understanding my limitations and where I have to grow as a writer. And I think with approaching a novel, I really want to make sure I put in the work first to get the skills, which probably means doing an MFA, which probably also means, I don't know, trying to put my teaching career on hold for a bit. I don't know exactly how that's going to work. All I can say about the novel right now is that my older brother is kind of annoyed at me because part of it is stolen from something that happened to him. So I should probably shout out Imran. Sorry, I'm going to take your story, and you're not going to do anything about it because you're just not.
Yeah, well, that's the price people say people pay to be family members of writers. I remember a time when my little sister introduced me to a friend. They were both about 16 and said, "Be careful what you say because it might end up in a book." And I realized that traumatized a small sector of Toronto's younger generation by putting them in stories and books. So hopefully Imran will forgive eventually. So I discovered that it was Doretta Lau and Asha, and I was probably pronouncing their names completely wrong when I was asking their questions. Agape Asha and Heju Pengyu, they were Doretta and Asha. So Asha asked a question. So Cindy Watson has another question. When you travel around the world, you come home to Toronto because of the complexity. That's not a question. That's a wonderful statement. Because of the complexity, diversity, and multiplicity of voices that are still very present here. Yes, it's true. And your cousin Nico wants to go bowling. Will you go bowling with him?
Nah, man, nobody plays GTA 4 anymore. And everybody hates Nico.
So let's see. Tell them about the Mr. Ali Instagram.
There's a fan page of drawings that kids have done at me at Jarvis Collegiate. Shout out Bulldogs. And it is pretty hilarious, but also kind of weird. I mean, there's definitely been a couple of times where I've been walking around in class and like looked at kids' phones and there's pictures of me on their phone and I'm like, oh, this is uncomfortable. And I probably shouldn't be okay with this, but I also don't want to deal with it.
Oh, geez. How has your writing style evolved over the past years? That's from Aviana Abella.
Oh, that's a great question. How's it evolved? I think definitely that I've been trying to more and more hold that suggestion that you gave me in my heart and trying to just write more naturally, write more like, I don't know, like, I guess in terms of like schools of poetry, I've always been really attracted to Frank O'Hara's kind of way of writing of just like, you put it down and it's done, even though I don't actually like that because I think the editing is really, really important. But wanting to at least have that sound to it of like not trying to be overly verbose. I think Bardia's review in Quill and Choir, because I'm like so hyper self-critical, I read it and I thought it was actually a negative review until my partner and my brother and a couple other people were like, no, it's actually great. Like, what is wrong with you? But one of the things he did mention in there is, it's like stylistically simple. And I don't know if that is meant to be like a bad thing, but I actually don't mind that necessarily. But I think like the editing process really, like, I think super accelerated my skills. And I am hugely thankful to Nick Thran, my editor. I saw him in the chat earlier. I don't know if he's still on.
Yeah, he's here somewhere. I just wanted to say, I remember a time when you said that editing wasn't something you particularly valued. So I guess that's changed. That was one of my questions. How did that change the process of working with Nick?
So I think it was before Nick. Like I think, okay, going back to that, that transcendent moment I had that inspired this collection. Like a big part of that was like kind of being able to see my ego and see what the ways it like has its tendrils everywhere, and that fact that I have a huge fucking head. Oops. I mean a big head. So I think after that experience, it was already like I think I was getting more comfortable with editing because I was like, oh yeah, people are not doing this to insult you. They're doing this to make your writing better. And I think working with Nick so closely and getting to see like, you know, a person who is so much more masterful in terms of his writing technique, those suggestions, certainly times where he gave suggestions where like my back would kind of like, you know, get like up about them, and then I would like sit with them for a while and be like, oh yeah, that's way better. Yeah. And I think just like being able to, you know, in like the different schools of learning, I think I'm like a person who learns by doing more than by hearing. So like once I actually got to do that on my own writing and see it in action, that I think really helped a lot. Oh, my mom is, I see my mom in the chat.
I'll get to her. Huda has a question. What's your favorite poem in the collection?
My favorite poem in the collection. I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, I think I just like, I've always loved big, and I think just because I've always loved elephants, and it's just like, it was also a piece that, you know, I wrote so, like it was one of the ones, speaking of editing, that like required very little editing. And I think it was like one of those few. You worked
on with Robert Priest, right? Poet, yeah. Toronto.
That is true, but it didn't require as much editing as I think some of the other ones did. So it was like, you know, one of those like rare pieces that kind of came out close to the way it was meant to be. So that one's there. I don't know. I like really like the last piece. I really like where it ends because I think it's like, you know, the last piece called Arrival. I think, you know, like as I said, the collection is a journey into like the worst place, and it's every time I read it, I kind of like remember what it was like to be there. And during the editing process was at times pretty horrifying. Like to do the editing of those climactic sections meant like putting myself back right into that mental space right during that period of time, and it was hard. Huge shout out to my partner Huda, who helped me through that. As yeah, she saw me in like a pretty bad state. But
can I read that last poem?
Should we end with that? I don't know. Is that
there's a couple more questions, so let me get to those. But let me read it.
All right, right now or after? Do it.
Read it right now.
Why don't you read it at the end? We can sign off, and I can go.
I'll read it at the end, or maybe I'll let you read it then.
No, you read it.
This is from. Pardon me.
Wait, did I finish the question?
This is from Sin. I want to ask Peasant's question. Okay.
Yes.
When you look at the very first beginnings of this poetry book and what it turned out to be, what happened between then and now, what did you shed or gain in the editing process?
Whoa.
Oh, yeah. And your mom wants me to ask one of her questions from Facebook.
Oh, no. Please.
But
all right, fine.
So I'm going to go find it while you answer that question.
Okay, so that question is really good. I mean, definitely there was I feel like, as probably is the case with most editing, there's a lot more excision than addition. And the book is way better for it. Like, there's still part of me, like, I remember there was an earlier draft of, there's an early draft of the book where one of my friends who'd read it had seen an early one and a later one and was kind of like, I actually like the early one better because it was more raw and it was like, it just felt more like visceral. And I think it has lost a bit of that in the process. Like but I think that's just like that's writing. Like you have to kind of get rid of some of that in service of, I think, the technique. If there's maybe that's not the right word, but I think generally it has like, I think I said this in the acknowledgments with Nick, but also with everybody else who helped me. And there was lots of people, including Passant, who posed a question. Like, she read an earlier draft, helped me a lot with her feedback, and lots of other people did as well. And so I'm eternally grateful to all of you. But I think it was like, the collection was like this thing. I don't want to call it a gem because I don't think it's maybe worth of that, but it's like a thing inside of ore, and everybody helped me kind of like pull away like the rocky bits of debris to extract that gem out. So thank you.
I think it's a myth that writers write in solitude. I mean, we write in solitude, but they come into the world with the help of so many other people. And the gift of a good editor is that they manage to help you bring out what you originally wanted to say even better. I think I probably lectured you to some extent on that point when you said some dist editing to begin with. But anyhow, moving on. A final question from your mother, Najma. Are you afraid more of commitment or separation?
Why am I separation?
Okay.
Period. I'm not going to elaborate at all because I'm not giving her the.
Now, will you read your last poem?
I just want to shout out to my mom. The book is dedicated to her. I didn't say it at the beginning because I felt weird. Also, shout out to my dad. I don't know if he's watching. They're sitting in their condo together, so I assume they are. But hi, Mom. I love you.
I miss seeing Najma at the readings we used to.
I know.
Yeah, it's been a few years since I've seen you, so good to see you online. Now read your poem, Arrival.
So we're ending up the last one?
Together, yeah. I think that's the last question. Well, we have one more. What inspired you to write poetry? If you want to answer that quickly and then read Arrival.
Sure. I mean, like I said, I think life is probably the biggest thing for me in terms of inspiration, but also like I feel like I'm kind of like almost plagiarizing something I wrote recently in an interview. Somebody asked the same question. And I think a lot of my inspiration for writing in terms of art comes not from writing. It comes from music, and it comes especially from movies. Like I'm a big movie guy, especially like Japanese cinema from like the 50s and 60s. So Yasujiro Ozu, who made Tokyo Story, just widely considered the greatest film of all time. That was a big influence on my writing style. I don't know where else to go. I'm also starting, I feel like, to gas out intellectually.
Yeah,
very draining.
You've been talking a lot, so it's been wonderful getting some insight into the collection and the poems and the writing process. And it feels kind of like I'm there in the room with you, even though I'm on the other side of the continent. So this has been really lovely for me to be part of. You were part of my last poetry collection launch, as were a few other people that I've seen pop up in the chat. But I would love to hear you read that last poem, because you're right, it does bring everything together. It kind of references things that came before. Do you have it open?
I do. Or you're reading it? Actually, I don't. Sorry, I said I do. I did it. Now I do.
Want me to read it?
Yes. Can you read it? And then we'll end up.
Sure. You can just sit back and relax. Arrival. Okay, stop making noises then. Arrival. There's the smallest of sounds, like a beetle's clicking mandibles, a plain breeze from the backyard. The mirror shifts a fraction of a fraction, and in its new light, I look and for the first time see both elephant and insect are myself. The beauty of the cicada song, the cockroach's unbreakable will. I see family, fraternity, all creation, love, God, too powerful for a self to overcome. So let's give Irfan some applause. Woo! My students taught me to applaud this way online. So yeah, it was just so wonderful. And it's such a wonderful experience to read the book. So please do buy it. I don't know if, Anjula, if you're going to say a few more words. Okay.
So thank you so much, Irfan and Emily. That was so much fun. What a fun YouTube book launch for you, Irfan. Yay! We're all so happy at Another Story Bookshop. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for joining us. Irfan, do you have anything you want to say before we wrap up? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute, Irfan. Irfan, you're on mute. Oh, hold on. I'm going to tell Irfan he's on mute. Okay.
All right. Yeah, just a huge thank you to everyone for coming out. I know this is like a really strange way of experiencing writing. It's a very strange way to share it. And thank you for making me feel so loved. Like even just seeing all the little emojis in the chat box really, put a big smile on my face. So thank you all for coming. Thank you again to Emily. Thank you to Anju. Thank you, Brick Books. Thank you, everyone. You're all wonderful.
Oh, thanks. And a big thank you to Mike at Another Story Bookshop for doing all the amazing tech and bringing this together. It would not be here on YouTube without Mike. Mike, thank you. So again, parting words, we have Accretion for sale at Another Story Bookshop. Don't come in to buy it. Not right now. We will get it to you. We will get it very safely to you. We will ship it. We will deliver it. You can't even come pick it up. But many other bookstores are carrying it. It's an incredible book of poetry. I think we're going to see lots of buzz for it and lots of love for it in the months to come. And at some point, when it's safe, Irfan, we want to have a party for you with some good food. And Emily, you're going to have to fly out to Toronto to come join us. So thank you again.
Pleasure.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here. And Irfan, I hope you feel the love we have for your work, for your important work. So thank you all and have a good night.